The Vampire King only wanted one normal Christmas dinner. But when the waitress leaned in and whispered, "Run. Now," he realized this night would cost him everything. As you join me into this supernatural journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling stories like this one. Let's begin. Snow fell gently from the dark winter sky, landing softly on the streets like tiny white feathers. Christmas lights glowed everywhere, on lampposts, shop windows, and trees lining the road. The world looked peaceful, warm, and alive. Inside Hearthstone Restaurant, the air smelled of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and pine. A tall Christmas tree stood near the entrance, decorated with golden ribbons and glowing red lights. Soft Christmas music played in the background. At a corner table near the window sat Lucian Blackthorne. He looked calm, handsome, and human. But he was none of those things. Lucian was the Vampire King, over 300 years old, ruler of the night, feared by monsters and hunters alike. Yet tonight, he wore a dark green sweater instead of royal black robes. His long coat was neatly hung on the chair behind him. His sharp instincts were hidden behind a polite smile. This night mattered to him more than any battle he had ever fought. Lucian sat beside Emily Carter, his girlfriend. She had warm brown eyes, soft curls tied loosely behind her head, and a bright red scarf wrapped around her neck. She looked happy, truly happy, and that made Lucian's chest ache in a way no weapon ever could. Across from them sat Richard Carter and Margaret Carter, Emily's parents. Richard Carter was a tall man with gray hair and a straight posture. He wore a clean brown jacket and sat with his hands folded on the table. His eyes were sharp and observant, like a man who had spent his life noticing small details. Margaret Carter looked kind and gentle. She wore a cream-colored sweater and smiled often, but her eyes missed nothing. She watched people the way one listens carefully to music. Lucian had faced armies, curses, and death itself. Yet this dinner made him nervous. Emily squeezed his hand gently under the table. "You're very quiet tonight," she said with a smile. "Are you nervous?" Lucian turned to her and forced a soft laugh. "A little," he replied. "Meeting your parents properly, it matters to me." Richard cleared his throat. "You've already met us before," Richard said calmly. "But tonight feels different." Lucian nodded. "Yes, sir, it does." Emily laughed lightly, trying to ease the tension. "Dad, you're making him uncomfortable." "I'm only observing," Richard replied. "That's what fathers do." Margaret smiled warmly at Lucian. "Relax, Lucian. It's Christmas. Tonight is about family and kindness." Lucian smiled back. "Thank you, ma'am." He meant it. The waitress arrived with menus. She wore a simple red uniform and a small Christmas pin shaped like a bell. Her name tag read Clara. "Good evening," she said. "Merry Christmas. Can I start you off with drinks?" "Yes, please," Emily said cheerfully. "Hot chocolate for me." "I'll have coffee," Richard said. "Tea, please," Margaret added. Clara turned to Lucian. "And for you, sir?" Lucian paused for half a second, just long enough to feel dangerous. "Water," he said. Clara nodded, but her eyes lingered on him strangely. For a brief moment, Lucian felt something cold brush against his senses. Not fear. Recognition. She walked away. Emily leaned closer to Lucian. "You okay?" "Yes," he said quickly. "Just thinking. Thinking about how he hadn't eaten human food in decades. Thinking about how one wrong mistake could ruin everything. Thinking about how tonight was a lie, but a beautiful one. Lucian had made a promise to himself. Just one normal night, he thought. One Christmas as a man. The food arrived soon after. Plates filled with roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, vegetables, and gravy were placed on the table. Steam rose into the warm air. Emily clapped her hands softly. "This looks amazing." Lucian smiled and picked up his fork. He pretended. He lifted food to his mouth but did not eat. He chewed slowly, carefully, then placed his fork down. He watched the others more than his plate. Richard noticed. "So," Richard said, cutting his turkey, "Emily tells us you work in consulting?" Lucien nodded. "Yes. Private consulting." "What kind?" Richard asked. Lucien met his gaze without blinking. "Problem solving." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "Interesting." Emily jumped in quickly. "Lucien is very smart, Dad. He helped me fix my entire project in one night." Lucien smiled at her, grateful. Margaret laughed softly. "That's impressive." Lucien felt a strange warmth inside him, something he hadn't felt in centuries. Oh. Outside the window, snow continued to fall. For the first time in 300 years, the Vampire King felt like he belonged somewhere. And that terrified him. Richard Carter watched Lucien carefully. Not obviously, not rudely, but carefully. Years in the military had trained Richard to notice things others ignored. Small movements, small habits, small mistakes. Lucien barely touched his food. He drank only water. And when he spoke, he never blinked. Richard took a slow sip of his coffee. "So, Lucien," he said, "how long have you been in the city?" Lucien answered smoothly. "A few years." "A few years," Richard repeated. "And before that?" Lucien paused. "I moved around a lot." "Work?" Richard asked. "Yes," Lucien said. Emily sighed softly. "Dad." "I'm just making conversation," Richard replied calmly. Margaret placed her hand on Richard's arm. "Let the young man eat." Lucien smiled politely, but inside, his instincts stirred. "He sees too much," Lucien thought. Emily leaned closer to Lucien and whispered, "He does this to everyone I date. Don't take it personally." Lucien whispered back, "I understand." Margaret watched Lucien now. She noticed how his smile never reached his eyes. How he reacted a second too late when someone laughed. How he seemed distant, like a man standing very far away, even while sitting at the table. "You have beautiful manners," Margaret said kindly. "Your parents must have raised you well." Lucien's heart tightened. "Yes," he said quietly. "They did." It was not a lie, but it was not the whole truth. His parents had been monsters, kings, and killers. Long dead, buried beneath centuries of blood and war. Richard leaned back in his chair. "You don't seem to celebrate Christmas much," he said. Lucien hesitated. "This is special to me." Emily smiled brightly. "It's his first Christmas dinner with a family." Richard raised an eyebrow. "First." Lucien nodded. "Yes, sir." The words hung in the air. Margaret smiled gently. "Well, everyone deserves a first." At that moment, church bells rang outside. Lucien froze. The sound echoed through his bones, sharp and sudden. His fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Emily noticed immediately. "Lucien." "I'm fine," he said quickly. "Just startled." But Richard noticed something else. Fear. Just for a second. The waitress, Clara, returned with refills. As she poured water into Lucien's glass, her hand shook. A few drops spilled onto the table. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Lucien looked up at her. Their eyes met. Her pupils widened. She leaned closer than necessary and whispered so softly only he could hear. "You shouldn't be here." Lucien's heart stopped. Before he could respond, she straightened and walked away. Emily frowned. That was strange. Richard stared after the waitress. "Yes, very." Margaret folded her napkin slowly. "Something feels off." Lucien forced a calm breath. Outside, the bells stopped ringing. The warmth of Christmas suddenly felt thin, fragile, like glass about to shatter. The restaurant still looked warm and cheerful. Christmas lights twinkled softly above every table. The tree near the entrance glowed peacefully. Laughter and quiet conversation filled the air. From the speakers, a slow Christmas song played, soft bells and gentle voices singing about peace on earth. But for Lucien Blackthorne, everything had changed. His senses were awake now. He could hear every heartbeat in the room, every breath, every small movement of chairs and plates. The smell of human blood mixed with food made his throat burn, not with hunger, but with fear. The waitress, Clara, moved between tables, but she avoided looking at Lucien again. Her steps were stiff, her shoulders tense, like someone walking toward danger. Lucien leaned slightly toward Emily. "That waitress," he said quietly. "Did you notice her?" Emily nodded. "Yes." She seemed nervous. "Maybe she's new." Lucien forced a small smile. "Maybe." But he knew better. "She knows what I am," he thought. "And she's afraid." Richard watched Lucien from across the table. "You all right?" Richard asked. "You look pale." Lucien nodded. "Just warm in here." Margaret frowned slightly. "You can take off your sweater if you like." Lucien shook his head quickly. "No, I'm fine." He couldn't explain that warmth made him uncomfortable. That heat reminded him of fire, of sunlight. Emily reached for her glass of hot chocolate. "I'm having such a nice time," she said. "I was worried this would be awkward." Richard gave a small smile. "It's fine." Lucien felt the tension in that single word. Clara returned again, this time with dessert menus. Her hands shook as she placed them on the table. "Would anyone like dessert?" she asked. Her voice was low. "Careful." "Yes," Emily said. "Their Christmas cake is amazing." Richard nodded. "One slice to share." Margaret smiled. "That sounds lovely." Clara looked at Lucien last. "And you, sir?" she asked quietly. Lucien hesitated. "No, thank you." Her eyes met his again. This time, she did not look away. She leaned closer, pretending to adjust the tablecloth. Her face was calm, but her eyes were full of panic. She whispered, barely moving her lips. "They're watching you." Lucien felt a sharp chill run through him. He didn't move. He didn't react. "Who?" he whispered back, just as softly. Clara swallowed. "The ones who wear smiles and carry blessings." Lucien understood immediately. Hunters. Holy hunters. The worst kind. Emily noticed Clara standing too close. "Is everything okay?" Clara straightened quickly. "Yes, of course." She turned to leave, then paused for just 1 second. She leaned back again, her voice shaking. "Run. Now." She walked away before Lucien could respond. Lucien's heart pounded, not fast, but heavy. Emily laughed lightly, unaware. That was strange. Maybe she's having a bad night. Lucien didn't answer. He was watching the room. A man near the bar wore a silver cross, not around his neck, but pinned inside his jacket. Lucien could smell holy oil faintly in the air. Another woman near the window whispered into her phone, her eyes never leaving him. The decorations suddenly felt like disguises. The Christmas music sounded too loud. This place is marked, Lucien realized. This dinner was never safe. Richard noticed Lucien's eyes moving. "You're very alert," Richard said. "Like you're expecting trouble." Lucien met his gaze. "I've learned to be careful." Margaret folded her hands. "Careful people usually have reasons." Lucien said nothing. Emily smiled, trying to keep things light. "Lucien just worries too much." But Lucien could feel it now. Danger was close. The waitress, Clara, stood behind the counter, gripping the edge tightly. Her breathing was uneven. She looked at Lucien once more and shook her head slightly. A silent warning. Lucien leaned closer to Emily. "Emily," he said gently, "if I asked you to leave right now, would you trust me?" She blinked. "What? Why?" Please, he said. Just answer. She studied his face. His eyes were serious. Afraid. Yes, she said slowly. I would. Richard straightened in his chair. Is something wrong? He asked. Lucien opened his mouth to answer. And then the front door of the restaurant opened. A cold wind rushed inside. The Christmas bells outside rang once. The man who entered wore a long dark coat and carried himself like someone who belonged everywhere. Snow dusted his shoulders. His smile was warm, friendly, and practiced. Behind him, the door closed softly. The bells stopped ringing. Lucien felt it instantly. The air changed. The man removed his gloves and looked around the restaurant like a guest enjoying the holiday decorations. "Merry Christmas," he said pleasantly. Several people replied, smiling. Lucien did not. Emily leaned closer. "Why are you tense?" Lucien whispered. "Because he's not here to eat." The man's eyes found Lucien immediately. He smiled wider. "Good evening," the man said as he approached their table. "May I join you?" Richard frowned. "Do we know you?" The man chuckled softly. "Not personally. But I know him." He looked directly at Lucien. Lucien slowly stood up. "No," Lucien said calmly. "You may not." The man placed a hand over his chest. "Father Alden Cross," he said. "Local priest." Margaret's eyes softened. "Oh, from St. Mark's Church." Father Cross nodded. "That's right." Emily smiled politely. "Nice to meet you, Father." Lucien felt sick. Holy energy rolled off the man like invisible fire. Father Cross turned back to Lucien. "You look well," he said. "Almost human." Emily frowned. "What does that mean?" Lucien swallowed. Richard stood up beside him. "I think you should leave." Father Cross sighed. "I was hoping we could keep this peaceful. It is Christmas, after all." He raised his voice slightly. "Lock the doors." Lucien's heart dropped. The sound of metal sliding echoed through the room. The doors were locked. Panic spread quickly. People stood up. Someone shouted. Emily grabbed Lucien's arm. "What's happening?" Lucien turned to her. He had hidden this truth for so long. But now there was no choice. "I need you to listen to me," he said quietly. "No matter what happens." Richard clenched his fists. "What did you bring into my family?" Father Cross smiled calmly. "The truth." He looked around the room. "You see," he said, "we've been hunting something very old. Something dangerous. A king hiding among humans." Emily's breath caught. Lucien closed his eyes. "Lucien," Emily whispered. He opened his eyes and looked at her, really looked at her. "I never wanted you involved," he said. "I just wanted one night. One normal Christmas." "Lucien," Emily said, her voice shaking, "what are you?" Silence fell over the table. Lucien spoke softly. "I'm not human." Emily stepped back slightly. Richard moved in front of his wife. Margaret's hands trembled. Father Cross nodded. "Tell them." Lucien took a breath he didn't need. "I am a vampire," he said. "And not just any vampire." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "This isn't funny." "I wish it were," Lucien replied. Father Cross clapped once. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "please remain calm. Tonight, we cleanse evil." The Christmas lights flickered. Clara screamed from behind the counter. "Stop!" Everyone turned. Her eyes glowed faintly. "You can't do this," she said, her voice breaking. "Not tonight." Father Cross smiled coldly. "Stay in your place, fallen one." Lucien stared at her. "Fallen one?" Emily grabbed Lucien's coat. "Is this real?" "Yes," Lucien said softly. "All of it." Tears fell down her face. "You lied to me." Lucien nodded. "I know. Outside, snow fell heavier. Inside, Christmas had died. The restaurant no longer felt warm. The Christmas lights still glowed, but now they flickered like dying stars. Shadows clung to the corners of the room. The soft music had stopped, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence filled only with frightened breathing. Lucien stood between Emily and Father Alden Cross. Around the room, people slowly stood up from their tables, not ordinary customers anymore. Coats opened slightly. Sleeves shifted. Lucien saw it clearly now. Silver blades hidden in cuffs. Wooden stakes disguised as walking canes. Small glass bottles filled with holy water tucked into pockets. Hunters. They had been sitting there the whole time. Laughing. Eating. Pretending. Waiting. Father Cross folded his hands calmly, as if about to say a prayer. "Please," he said, "remain seated. Panic will only make this unpleasant." A woman near the window started crying. "What is this? What's happening?" Father Cross turned to her kindly. "Justice." Lucien felt Emily's hand shaking in his sleeve. "Lucien," she whispered, "I'm scared." He turned toward her, his voice low and steady. "Stay close to me, no matter what you see." Richard Carter stepped forward, placing himself in front of Emily and Margaret. "You're not touching my daughter," Richard said firmly. Father Cross smiled. "Brave words. But you don't understand the danger you're standing next to." Lucien clenched his jaw. "You invited danger into this room," Lucien said coldly. "Not me." Father Cross raised an eyebrow. "You're standing in a church-owned building, vampire. On Christmas night. Did you really think we wouldn't notice?" Lucien's eyes darkened. "You turned a holy night into a slaughter," Lucien replied. Father Cross spread his hands. "We turned it into an ending." The hunters began to move. Slowly, carefully. They circled Lucien's table like wolves. Emily looked around in horror. "They're everywhere." Margaret held her chest, her voice trembling. "Richard." Richard didn't take his eyes off the nearest hunter. "Behind me." Lucien took a step forward. "Enough," he said. The word echoed unnaturally through the room. Several hunters froze. Father Cross laughed softly. "Still playing king?" Lucien's voice dropped, deep and dangerous. "I am a king, and you've trapped innocent people in your holy pride." Father Cross's smile faded slightly. "Innocent," he repeated. "Your kind has slaughtered thousands." "And yours has burned children," Lucien snapped. "Do not pretend your hands are clean." The tension snapped. A hunter lunged. Lucien moved faster than the eye could follow. In one smooth motion, he grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisted sharply, and sent the man crashing into a table. Plates shattered. Screams erupted. "Get down!" Richard shouted, pulling Margaret with him. Emily screamed as Lucien spun, knocking another hunter away with a force that sent him sliding across the floor. Lucien was careful. He didn't strike to kill. Not yet. Wooden stakes flew through the air. One grazed Lucien's shoulder, burning like fire. He hissed but stayed upright. "Lucien!" Emily cried. "I'm fine," he said through clenched teeth. Father Cross raised his hand. The hunters stopped. "Enough," the priest said. "We don't want chaos." Lucien laughed bitterly. "You brought chaos with you." Father Cross looked at Emily. "You should step away from him," he said gently. "He's manipulating you." Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "He saved us. He didn't hurt anyone." "Yet," Father Cross replied. He turned to Lucien. "Kneel," he commanded. "Surrender, and no one else gets hurt." Lucien looked at the frightened people around him. At Emily's shaking hands. At Richard standing firm despite the fear in his eyes. Slowly, Lucien lowered his head. But he did not kneel. "I will not bow to cowards hiding behind carols," he said. The hunters tightened their circle. And then a scream rang out from the counter. "Stop!" Everyone turned. Clara stood there, her body trembling, her eyes glowing softly with silver light. "You promised," she shouted at Father Cross. "You said no innocents would be harmed." Father Cross's face hardened. "This does not concern you." "It does," Clara cried. "This night is sacred." Light flared around her, faint but undeniable. Lucien stared at her in shock. "She's not human." Father Cross raised his hand sharply. "Remove her." Two hunters moved toward Clara. Lucien's patience shattered. His eyes burned red. The room darkened as if the shadows themselves obeyed him. "No," Lucien said softly. The word carried power. Chairs slammed back. Windows rattled. Hunters stumbled as if pushed by unseen hands. Lucien stepped fully into his true nature. And Emily watched it all. The air felt heavy, thick with fear and power. Emily could barely breathe. Lucien stood before her, not smiling, not pretending. His eyes glowed faintly red. His presence filled the room like a storm held back by will alone. This was the man she loved. And also, something else. "Lucien," she whispered, "please talk to me." He turned to her immediately. The red faded from his eyes. "I'm here," he said gently. "I won't let anything happen to you." Her voice broke. "What are you?" Lucien swallowed. "I wanted to tell you," he said quietly. "So many times," Richard shouted. "Emily, get away from him." Emily didn't move. Father Cross watched closely, his voice calm. "Go on. Let her hear it." Lucien took a slow breath. "I was born a human," he said. "Hundreds of years ago. I was cursed. Turned. I didn't choose this." Emily stared at him, tears falling freely. "All this time," she whispered, "every smile, every promise was real," Lucien said quickly. "My feelings were never a lie." "How do I know that?" she cried. Lucien stepped back, giving her space. "Because I could leave right now," he said. "I could destroy this place and disappear." He looked around at the hunters. "But I won't." Silence filled the room. Margaret spoke softly. "Why stay?" Lucien looked at Emily. "Because I love your daughter." Emily covered her mouth, shaking. Father Cross scoffed. "Love? You feed on humans." Lucien turned sharply. "I haven't fed in weeks." Emily looked up. "Is that true?" Lucien nodded. "I stopped when I met you." Richard stared at him in disbelief. "You expect us to believe that?" Lucien met his eyes. "You expect me to believe you'd risk your family's lives for a lie?" Richard hesitated. Emily took a step forward. "Why tonight?" she asked. "Why bring me here if you knew this could happen?" Lucien's voice cracked. "Because Christmas reminds me of what I lost," he said. "Family, warmth, choice." He looked at the tree, at the lights. "I wanted one night where I wasn't feared." Emily's knees felt weak. "You should have trusted me," she whispered. "I was afraid," Lucien admitted. "Afraid you'd look at me the way they do." She looked at him now. Not with fear. With pain. "I don't know how to feel," she said honestly. "That's fair," Lucien replied. "I don't ask you to forgive me." Father Cross stepped forward. "Touching," he said. "But this ends now." He raised a silver blade. Emily screamed, "Stop!" Everyone froze. Emily stepped in front of Lucien. "If you want him," she said, her voice shaking but strong, "you go through me." Richard shouted, "Emily, move." She didn't. Lucien's eyes widened. "Emily, no. I don't know what you are," she said. "But I know who you've been to me." Father Cross stared at her coldly. "Move." "No," she said. Lucien felt something break inside him. 300 years of darkness. And suddenly, hope. He gently took Emily's hand. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "If surrendering saves you, I'll do it." Emily looked up at him, horrified. "No." Father Cross smiled. "That," he said, "is the spirit of Christmas." Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, love and truth stood trembling against violence. The room was frozen in silence. Emily stood in front of Lucien, her arms slightly spread as if her small body could protect him from blades and bullets. Her hands were shaking, but she did not move. Father Alden Cross watched her with cold interest. "You are brave," he said calmly. "But bravery does not stop evil." Lucien's voice was low and urgent. "Emily, please. Step aside." She shook her head. "No. Not like this." Around them, the hunters tightened their grip on their weapons. Silver glinted under the Christmas lights. The decorations above them felt wrong now, too bright for what was about to happen. Then a voice rang out again. "Enough." Everyone turned. Clara stepped out from behind the counter. Her hands were glowing. Not brightly, not violently, but steadily, like candlelight that refused to go out. The air around her shimmered softly, as if the world itself was holding its breath. "I warned you," Clara said, her voice breaking. "I warned him. I warned all of you." Father Cross's face twisted with anger. "You had your chance, fallen one. Step back." Clara shook her head slowly. "I won't," she said. "Not tonight." One of the hunters laughed nervously. "She's bluffing." Clara raised her eyes, and for the first time everyone saw what she truly was. Her pupils vanished, replaced by silver light. Faint scars glowed along her arms, old, deep wounds that looked burned into her skin. "I was an angel once," she said softly, "before I chose mercy over orders." A wave of fear moved through the room. Emily whispered, "An angel." Clara smiled sadly at her. "Not anymore." Lucien stared at Clara in shock. "You knew what I was." She nodded. "And I knew what they planned." Father Cross raised his voice. "This is blasphemy." Clara stepped forward. "You turned Christmas into a hunting ground," she said. "You used faith as bait." She looked at Lucien. "You came here seeking peace," she said gently. "That matters." The hunters began to move again. Father Cross shouted, "Take them both." Everything happened at once. Clara spread her arms wide. Light exploded from her body, not blinding, but powerful. The windows rattled. The floor cracked beneath her feet. Several hunters were thrown backward, slamming into tables and walls. Emily screamed. Lucien grabbed her and pulled her behind him. "Clara, stop!" Lucien shouted. "You'll burn yourself out." Clara looked at him and smiled, a real smile, warm and human. "That's the point," she said. She turned to Father Cross. "You were never chosen," she said quietly. "You only stole the words." Father Cross stepped back, shielding his eyes. "You're condemning yourself." Clara's body began to glow brighter. Smoke rose from her skin. She screamed, not in pain, but effort. "Gio!" she shouted at Lucien. "Get them out." Lucien hesitated. For centuries, people had died for him. He hated that. "I won't leave you," he said. Clara shook her head. "You already gave up everything by loving her." She looked at Emily. "Hold on to him," Clara said softly. "He's trying to be better." Then she screamed. The light burst outward in a violent wave. Hunters were thrown across the room. Weapons shattered. The Christmas tree burst into flames, golden fire, not red. Clara fell to her knees. Her body burned from the inside out, turning slowly to ash. Emily cried out, "No!" Lucien stood frozen, watching as Clara looked up one last time. "Merry Christmas," Clara whispered. Then she was gone. Ash scattered across the floor like gray snow. The room was silent. Even Father Cross looked shaken. Lucien clenched his fists. The smell of burned feathers filled the air. The silence did not last. Father Cross straightened his coat and raised his blade. "Finish it," he ordered coldly. The hunters moved again, angrier now. Lucien snapped. Something ancient and terrible rose inside him. "No more," he said. The lights above shattered. Darkness flooded the room. Lucien moved like a shadow given form. He disarmed one hunter, twisting the man's wrist and sending the silver knife skidding across the floor. He kicked another into a wall hard enough to crack plaster. Emily watched in horror and awe. Lucien was fast, precise, controlled. He did not kill, but blood spilled. A hunter stabbed Lucien's side with a silver blade. Lucien roared in pain, grabbing the man and throwing him across the room. Blood soaked into Lucien's sweater, dark and thick. "Lucien!" Emily screamed. "I'm still standing," he shouted back. Richard grabbed a fallen chair leg and stood beside Lucien. "You're not fighting alone," Richard said. Lucien looked at him in surprise. "You should run." Richard shook his head. "Not without my family." Margaret helped Emily hide behind a table. "Stay down," she said firmly. Lucien felt something strange then. Respect. A hunter raised a gun filled with blessed rounds. Lucien moved to shield the Carters. Bullets tore through his back. He screamed as holy fire burned through him. But he did not fall. He turned slowly, eyes glowing red like burning embers. "You've hurt enough," he growled. He slammed his fist into the floor. The ground cracked. The remaining hunters stumbled. Christmas lights fell from the ceiling, tangling around broken bodies. Blood dripped down red ribbons and white tablecloths. Father Cross backed away. "You are a monster," he spat. Lucien staggered forward, bleeding heavily. "Yes," Lucien said. "But tonight I chose not to be." He raised his hand. And stopped. He smelled something unexpected. Fear. But not from Emily. From Father Cross. The priest turned and ran. The doors burst open as hunters fled into the snow. Sirens wailed in the distance. Lucien fell to his knees. Emily ran to him immediately. "Lucien, stay with me." He collapsed into her arms, his blood soaking her coat. Richard knelt beside them, his face pale. "He's dying." Lucien laughed weakly. "Not yet." He looked around the ruined restaurant. Clara's ashes lay scattered across the floor. "She saved us," Emily whispered. Lucien nodded. "She saved my soul." Snow blew in through the broken doors. Red and white mixed together on the floor, blood and Christmas decorations. Lucien closed his eyes for a moment. He had won the fight. But the night was not over. Snow drifted quietly through the broken doors of the restaurant. The sirens outside grew louder, then stopped. Red and blue lights flashed against the shattered windows, mixing with the soft glow of the Christmas decorations that still hung from the ceiling. Lucien lay on the floor, his head resting in Emily's lap. His skin was pale, more than usual. Dark blood soaked through his clothes, spreading across the white tablecloth beneath him. Each breath came slower than the last. Emily pressed her hands against his wounds, her fingers shaking. "Please," she whispered again and again. "Please don't die." Lucien opened his eyes slightly and looked at her. Even now, he smiled. "I promised you," he said weakly. "I'd protect you." Tears fell onto his face. "This isn't protection. This is you dying." Richard knelt beside them, his face tight with worry. "Is there anything that can be done?" Lucien laughed softly. "There's always something. Just never without a cost." Margaret stood nearby, holding Emily's coat around her shoulders. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "What cost?" she asked. Lucien closed his eyes. "For a vampire king," he said quietly, Immortality is not just life. It is power, authority, protection. Emily shook her head. I don't care about that. I just want you alive. Lucien lifted his hand and gently touched her cheek. I know, he said. That's why this hurts. The sound of boots echoed as police officers and medics entered the restaurant. They stopped short when they saw the destruction. Broken tables, blood, ash scattered like gray snow. One paramedic approached carefully. We can help. Lucien shook his head slightly. You can't. Father Alden Cross was gone. The hunters were gone. But their work had already been done. Holy weapons had torn through Lucien's body in ways that would not heal. Emily looked up at him desperately. You said there's always a cost. Tell me. Lucien hesitated. Then he spoke. There is an old law, he said. Older than any church. Older than my crown. Richard listened closely. If a vampire willingly gives up his throne, Lucien continued, and releases all power tied to it, the curse breaks. Emily's breath caught. Breaks how? Lucien looked into her eyes. I would live, he said. But as a man. Silence filled the room. No immortality, he continued. No powers. No kingdom. No protection. Margaret whispered, You'd be human. Lucien nodded. Emily grabbed his hand tightly. Then do it. Lucien smiled sadly. It's not that simple. Richard frowned. What aren't you saying? Lucien's voice dropped. There is no guarantee I survive the change. The magic might leave me empty. Emily shook her head violently. I don't care. I'd rather have 1 year with you than forever without you. Lucien closed his eyes. For 300 years, he had ruled the night. He had survived wars, betrayals, and centuries of loneliness. And now, the hardest decision of his life stood before him. Power or love. Lucien slowly pushed himself upright, despite the pain. The room seemed to respond to him. The shadows shifted. The air trembled. This must be done willingly, he said. Out loud. Emily stood with him, holding his arm. Lucien looked around the ruined restaurant, at the blood, the broken lights, the ash where Clara had fallen. I never wanted to be king, he said. I became one because I survived. His voice grew stronger. Tonight, I choose to stop surviving. The lights flickered violently. Lucien raised his head. I, Lucien Blackthorne, he said clearly, renounce the vampire throne. A deep sound echoed, like distant thunder. The air grew cold. I release my dominion, he continued, his voice shaking, my immortality and my claim over the night. The ground cracked beneath him. Emily held him tighter. I choose love, Lucien whispered. Over eternity. A sharp pain tore through his chest. Lucien screamed. Dark smoke poured from his body, twisting upward like shadows being ripped away. The glowing red in his eyes faded. And silence. Lucien collapsed forward. Emily screamed his name. Emily woke to silence. Not the heavy silence of fear, but a soft, peaceful one. She opened her eyes slowly. White walls. A hospital room. Morning light streamed through the window, pale and gentle, like the first calm breath after a storm. Lucien, she whispered. She turned her head. He was there, sitting in a chair beside the bed. Pale, weak, alive. Hey, he said softly. Emily stared at him, frozen. Then she cried. She sat up and threw her arms around him carefully. He winced but laughed quietly. You're real, she sobbed. You're really here. So are you, Lucien replied. I was worried I'd wake up alone. She pulled back and looked at him closely. His eyes were different. No glow. No ancient weight. Just human. You did it, she whispered. Lucien nodded. I think I did. Richard stood near the window, arms crossed, watching them. His face softened when he saw Lucien awake. Margaret entered quietly with 2 cups of coffee. "Good morning," she said gently. "Merry Christmas." Emily laughed through her tears. "It doesn't feel real." Lucien looked at his hands. "They told me my heart stopped," he said. "For almost a minute." Emily's breath caught. "But it started again," Lucien continued. "On its own." Richard cleared his throat. "Doctors say you're normal. Miraculously normal." Lucien smiled. "I don't know how to feel about that yet." Emily took his hand. "We'll figure it out together." Lucien nodded slowly. Later that morning, they walked outside. The city was quiet. Snow covered everything in soft white. The chaos of the night before felt far away, like a bad dream. Lucien stepped into the sunlight. He flinched, then laughed. "It doesn't burn," he said in disbelief. Emily smiled. "Welcome to being human." They stopped near a small church. The bells rang gently. Lucien listened. This time, he didn't freeze. He just stood there, peaceful. "What happens now?" Emily asked. Lucien thought for a moment. "I learn how to live," he said. "Not rule, not hide, just live." Emily leaned her head against his shoulder. "That sounds perfect." Lucien looked up at the sky. For the first time in 300 years, the future felt short, and precious, and real. As they walked away together, snow falling softly around them, Lucien thought of Clara, of sacrifice, of choice. That Christmas, the vampire king died, and a man was born. If this story moved you, if love, sacrifice, and second chances still matter to you, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this story with someone who believes even monsters can choose love. More dark Christmas tales are coming.